Welcome to the Wish I'd Known Then podcast, where we focus on how authors found success, looking at strategies that have taken them to the top of the bestseller charts, as well as what they've learned from their mistakes. Because being an indie author is more than knowing the latest marketing trend. It's about being innovative and creative and learning from your mistakes. Your co-hosts, Jami and Sara Rosette, couldn't be more different. In fact, they're a study in contrasts. However, despite all of their differences, they agree that sharing what they wish they'd known, both the good and the bad, is the key to moving forward. Let's get to the show.
Welcome to the Wish I'd Known Then podcast. I'm Sara Rosette.
And I'm Jami Albright. And this week we have
Cece Hunter.
Oh, yes, we do. Very good.
Yeah.
I love Cece. She's been kind of a hero of mine and someone I've looked up to before I even from the very first Romance Writers of America meeting I went to. So, yeah, I was really happy to have her on the show.
Yeah, she was a lot of fun to talk to. And
yes.
She talks a lot about, blending genres, which, you know, she does that. And one thing she writes is romantic suspense, romantic comedy suspense.
Yeah.
And I was like, is that a genre?
Yeah, it is. And they're hilarious. Yeah, they are. They're so funny. And there's a real mystery in them too. You know, so it's kind of, or not mystery, but that's suspenseful. There's always probably a dead body or something.
That sounds like right up my alley.
Yeah, exactly. And she writes those as Christy Craig, but she also has her Shadowfall series, the YA. The YA series, which she writes under CC Hunter. So so it was a great interview.
Yeah, so that's coming up. What have you been doing this week?
Just kind of more of the same, really, just getting this book, I've written some on it, but I'm trying not to write too far ahead until I know exactly what I'm doing. I spent an hour on the phone yesterday with H. Claire Taylor. She does the story alignment, and she helped me kind of get some things really clear. She does this really unique thing that I've really never heard of anybody else doing. She uses the Enneagram, and I don't know if you know what that is. And she helps you see which number your characters are and how the things about the Enneagram would work for them and against them. And it just makes it so clear. I mean, it really does help. And so I did that with her yesterday, and she actually has a free course, and it's
cool.
In the author alignment. So it's basically helps indie authors kind of decide what's important, what's not important, what to say yes to, what to say no to, what to say maybe to, or put on the back burner until you're ready.
Yeah.
Emotionally.
Some of that's so hard to decide. Yeah.
It is. And it's a free course, and we'll put the link in the show notes. So that's really all I've got going on. Just, and the end of my yesterday. What is today? Okay, today's Friday. So yesterday was the end of my month for my release, and it did amazingly well.
Yeah.
The numbers were fantastic, and I'm excited to see what happens, because last month for the launch, I did not advertise any book but the new book. So this month, I'm going to be advertising the Bride's books and this book. So I'm really interested to see what happens. I think that read-through, I should get a pretty big bump on read-through with that. I'm hoping I do anyway. So I'll check back and let y'all know how that goes. But yeah.
That sounds great.
How about you? What's going on?
Well, this week I've kind of transitioned since I finished the draft of the Christmas book. It's like now I can do more admin stuff. So I have this long list of things that I need to do that just, starting to mark things off, and that feels good to get some stuff done. And I was going to share that I got my stats for the sales through Ingram for July. And I was just amazed because I sold over 1,000 print books in July through Ingram.
Wow. That's amazing.
With all this COVID stuff going on, and bookstores, most of them are closed. They're able to mail things, and a lot of the Ingram sales go through bookstores or to libraries. And I'm selling hardcover, large print case laminate books at $29.
Oh my gosh.
I mean, I don't make that, because I have a wholesale discount. but it's got to be libraries buying those, I'm pretty
Yeah.
sure. So
That's amazing.
so that's a little secret that
Yes.
a lot of people say, Ingram isn't worth it, that it's too complicated and stuff. So if you're selling print books on KDP, then you might look into Ingram. And I'll just let you guys know that might be worth your time, even though it's kind of it's a upskilling your knowledge, because you have to figure out how to do all the Ingram stuff, but it's not that hard and it can be done.
But it's an investment that pays off. I mean, it has the potential to really pay off. And if you're in KU, you can still do this with your print books. So it's not, you're not exclusive with your print books. It's only your ebooks that you're.
And all it is really, like if you have vellum, you can do the same interior. Mm-hmm. And then for me, I just pay my cover designer to do the special cover for like an extra, I think it's $25. She'll do the other cover for Ingram because they have some different requirements for color and size. And so like once you've done that, then they're up there as long as you leave them up. So
that's amazing.
So that's really just great money that people are leaving on the table, and I hear people talk about it, and I'm like, well, okay.
I haven't done it, so yeah, I need to.
But see, like, I think it's very genre dependent, though, because like mystery readers like print books, and I haven't heard romance readers buying as much in print. So do your research before you dive in. Find out, if it's worth your time. So so I'm doing that, and I'm thinking of narrating my nonfiction audiobook myself. So we'll see how that's going to go. I'm going to make the attempt. I'm going to record a short portion and send it off and see if it's,
okay.
Because I don't know how to do all the settings and stuff. I have a friend who's done it, and she sent me all the specifics, and I was like, okay, maybe I'll just outsource that because that's pretty complicated.
I don't know if y'all can hear. They're digging up the street in front of my house. So, if y'all hear the grinding, I'm not burying a body. It's just the streets being dug up. So
she's not, I'm not outsourcing my research to Jami.
No, not at all. Not at all. So we should probably get on with the show. But just as a reminder, we have a Facebook group, Wish I'd Known Them for Writers. There are 2 questions. You got to know who the co-hosts are, and you got to know where we're from. And if you've listened even once, you know where we're from. So we hope that you would join us there. And let's get on to the interview.
Sounds good. Today on the podcast, we have Cece Hunter with us. Hi, Cece.
Hi, how are you?
We are doing good.
We're so glad you're here.
Well, I'm glad to be here.
So let me read a bio, and then we will jump right into the questions. Cece Hunter is the New York Times bestselling author of over 35 books, including Shadow Falls and Shadow Falls After Dark series. In addition to winning numerous awards and rave reviews for her novels, Cece is also a photojournalist, a motivational speaker, and a writing coach. Cece Hunter is a pen name. Her real name is Christy Craig, and she also writes humorous romantic suspense novels. So we're glad to have you here.
I'm glad to be here.
So, Christy, you write YA, paranormal, and romantic comedy kind of suspense. Is that right?
Right. My YA is I also have written 2 contemporary.
Oh, that's right. That's right. Yeah.
I got my fingers in all kinds of pies.
So how did you get into writing?
Oh, Lord. I'm dyslexic, and I know that's rare that I'm a writer, but growing up, I think if I hadn't been dyslexic, I would have been a reader. One of those that just lived in a book. Mm-hmm. But being dyslexic, instead of reading, I would actually make up stories in my head. So I think by the time I was about 11, I was actually writing stories in my head. They would last months. And, these were full-length books because and like a lot of new writers do. I mean, if I got bored with something happening, I'd jump off and go into another book. So, so I always started just telling myself stories. And it wasn't until I was 23 and newly married. And my husband's like, what are you going to do with the rest of your life? And I was like, I'm from Alabama and I've done it. I'm married well.
All goals accomplished at that point, right?
I tell you, and so he's like, no, you need a passion. You need to figure out what you want to do with the rest of your life. So I said something, I put into words I had never said before. And that was, I've kind of always wanted to be a writer. And his reply was, then do it. And so it was sort of like a challenge, one of those that your husband tosses out at you sometimes.
Yes.
And you're like, well, I'll show you.
Yes.
And so I did show him. It took 10 years, but I eventually, I started writing and sort of discovered, accidentally bought a book and found out there was a Romance Writers of America. And I joined it and eventually just kept writing. And that was in 84. Gosh, that makes me feel old. And I know, a long time ago, a lifetime ago. And anyway, so I started writing, and it took me 10 years, but I did eventually sell my first book, and thought I had made it.
That's one of our questions is, what was your first big success? So was that when you sold your book, or?
Well, honestly, I think my big success, my first big success was finally in the Golden Heart. And that was I sort of compare it to going fishing for the first time. If you've ever the first time I ever threw that hook in the water, I actually caught a fish. And that was what the Golden Heart was. It was validation that I'm doing something that is rewarding. And so it really kind of made me hang in there. That was in 88. So it wasn't till 94 until my book became published. But so I think it was the Golden Heart and then selling the book. But it took, like many writers, I think they have challenges. And sometimes we assume once we sell a book that we've made it. And for me, it wasn't quite that easy. I sold my first book and then didn't sell another one for 13 years. So,
but you kept writing.
Oh, well, I kept writing novels for, I think, about 2 or 3 years. And then I started doing freelance short stories. I would do articles for magazines. I picked up a camera and started using it. So I started doing photography for magazines. And it became a full-time job. But my true love and first love was writing novels, fiction. And so years later, when my daughter graduated college and U of H wasn't holding out their hand for money, I told my husband, I said, that's it. I'm going back to writing fiction. And he was like, well, can you do both for a while? And so I did do both and it still took me about, I think it was in probably 2000. So it still took me about 5 or 6 years. But during that time, I wrote and completed 8 novels and 6 proposals.
Wow.
So I just, I had the bug then good, and I wasn't, no one was
You weren't letting go of it. And we should let our listeners know that the Golden Heart is a contest by Romance Writers of America. They have, at the end of the year, they had their big conference, and they had the Rita Awards and the Golden Heart Awards. And Rita Awards were for published authors. Golden Heart was for non-published authors. Correct, Christy?
Correct.
Yeah. And so it's a huge, huge honor. And it is that validation that I can't even imagine. That would have been amazing to get that. So, so tell us what you wish you'd known about writing and craft when you started.
Oh, goodness. There's so many things. I mean, where do you start? It's crazy because you feel as if you're really going into this a little bit blind. And yet there's so many people out there that will give you the advice. I took a lot of advice. It was through RWA, through the peers of other writers who was writing when I first joined the critique group. Fabulous. And we kind of grew together as writers. We all was on this mission of discovering how we do this, and we would all go away and learn something. So Number one, the things I've done right, and there's some things I've of course done wrong, but I think join a critique group is one that right away and find a good one. And so I think things I wish I had known though more was that you can't take all the advice. A lot of things that I veered off and did differently, and some of the things that I've learned was someone told me once, don't be a jack of all trades, stick to one thing. And yet for me, if I had stuck to that advice, I wouldn't be writing today. I wouldn't be where I am today. I think writing in any genre of any type of writing can keep you motivated and keep your writing muscles strong. So for me, even if that book you're writing, or even if that genre you're trying to work in isn't working, find anything that you can do to write that will help motivate you and keep you learning as a writer and growing. So that was number one. I think in the beginning it was the point of view. So many people jump point of views, and point of view basically is who's telling your story. That was another one that was we kind of all learned in this critique group together. So it was learning how to do that. But as far as the craft, it really is, it's about the story. It's about the characters. And I think oftentimes we try to emulate other writers instead of finding our own voice. So I would say one thing that I wish I had done sooner was trust my voice. The first book that was actually published was a sweet silhouette romance. And I'm very proud of that book. There's nothing wrong with that book, but it is not a Christy Craig book. It is not a C.C. Hunter book. It is a book written trying to write a book that would fit what the guidelines and what other people wanted. So I think finding your own voice. And if, once I discovered writing with the voice, the humor, the sassiness, the smart assness that I sometimes write, I think my voice came out and I grew as a writer much quicker.
Right. And don't you find, I think this is true, but it's totally only because of my own experience. But when you write humor, you really do have to know when to stick to your guns and then when to let something go. If you get a critique that says, this is funny, but it doesn't necessarily move the story forward or whatever, but it does, because it's integral to the story and to the character. And sometimes I've had to let things go, but there are other things I've stuck to my guns about. And those are the things that readers talk about later. And, but I think sometimes with comedy, it's harder, because depending on who's giving the critique, they may not get your humor all the time. That's
right.
just
humor is very subjective. So therefore, when you write humor, you should know going in that you're allowing yourself to be criticized by more people, because everybody has an idea of what's funny and what isn't. But you're right. I mean, one thing that people don't realize, I think, it's sort of like if you were writing a paranormal romance. You can't write scene after scene without something paranormal happening.
Right.
You've got to have that paranormal in there. And when you're writing a real romantic comedy, there's got to be comedy in there. If not, you're not being true to the story or yourself as a writer. Right. And so the humor plays a good part in it. I don't think I try to write funny to be funny. I write a story about a character who looks at life in such a different way that's what makes it funny.
Right. And my comedy is very situational. They get in a weird situation and then they, getting out of it can a lot of times be comedic. And, but yeah, so I think you're right. I think that it's, but that's part of your voice too. That's just part of your voice. I know because I've read your comedies, your romantic comedy kind of suspense books, they are funny, but it's situational too, because they get themselves in some situations.
Right.
So I have a quick question about comedy writing. So do you write your story and then layer in the humor later, or do you do it all at once? It's kind of a writing question as well. But does your humor come first, in the middle, or later?
I'm really a sort of a one draft person. I won't deny that I don't go back and reread what I've written and improve it, but generally it's on a basis of I write one draft, generally speaking. I may stop when I feel like I'm losing my way or whatever and go back and reread what I've and polish as I go. But my stories generally come out all at the same time. When I go back and I'm rereading and doing something polishing, I'm working on right now the first book in a humorous romantic suspense kind of with a Western theme trilogy, and I'm working on the first book. And so I wrote the first 260 something pages and had to stop to do edits on a different book. So I was away from it for a couple of months, actually. So I went back and I reread the book and going through, and I would find ways to say something that might be truer to that character, and in that sense, it might be funnier. So I might add levels of humor, but generally speaking, by the time I'm finished with the book, it's all there except the polish. Being dyslexic, I'll forget words. My 100,000 word book always becomes like 110,000 because I've put out 10,000 these, those, ifs. So it's like they grow.
And hilarious.
It's so interesting because we've had different people on it. Everybody has a different process. Mm-hmm. And we've talked a lot with people who, like, once you figure out what your process is and you stop trying to do it the right way or the way that, you're supposed to, it just goes much better. So I think that's cool that you do one draft mostly, and then you go back and polish and you're done. That's great.
That is awesome.
That's something that I think people need to know too. And that's something you were talking about, things that you've learned about craft, is that one thing every writer, I think, going in should know is that there is no one way. There is no right way. Mm-hmm. It is what fits you, what makes it, what works for you. And that's so important, because if I tried to write like other people and follow how they do something, I probably would not be successful. It would either be too much stress or or not enough pressure or something. So I think you got to find the way that works for you is really important.
Very true. Well, so switching gears a little bit, what about marketing? What do you wish you had known about marketing?
Oh, goodness. Marketing.
It's a big topic.
Yes, it is. But I tell you what, because I was writing freelance, meaning I would come up with an idea for a magazine, be it a profile piece on someone or an article about some kind of organization that was doing something good. You constantly were looking at ways, does this story fit? And so writing freelance, you have to be a person, you have to be good at marketing. You have to be able to read a magazine, flip through a magazine and know this story fits their line, what they would want. So you kind of have to be able to read that. So I think I was pretty good at marketing when I first started. I was good at figuring out how to target something, whether something fit. And I wasn't perfect. I made a lot of mistakes going in. But at the same time, marketing, but yet it's a different story when and I know we're going to talk about doing indie versus traditional, but it's a different story because I was marketing stories to publishers and more than I was marketing stories to readers, if that makes sense.
That's such a good point. Yeah.
And so there is a completely different viewpoint when you're doing one versus the other. And you need to know that going in. There's a lot more, it's a different, I don't even want to say it's more work, but it's definitely, and nowadays the way traditional is, you still do a lot of your own marketing. When I first started out, you sold to a publisher, they pretty much did everything for you. They may ask you to do something, but when it got more and more, they were saying, do blogs, do Facebook, do this. It was like all of a sudden the benefits of being a traditional writer that were, the publisher took care of everything. Suddenly the authors were being asked to do more and more different stuff for their own marketing. And so, I mean, now I do both. I still do both. But I think marketing is important because you need to know how you fit into other, into the reader world. And there are a lot of people that are still, even though it's in the genre specific, there are people that want to read a certain genre. And then there are others that, no, they want, they'll open to anything. And I think the indie market allows you to blend genres more so, because that was a big deal especially for me, that I was writing, when I first started writing comedy, I was writing romantic suspense and comedy, and they didn't know where to put me. They asked me at one point, what shelf do you see yourself on? Are you on the romantic suspense shelf, or are you on the contemporary shelf, or are you on the romantic comedy shelf? Because you're such a blend. And literally, a publisher asked me that, where do you see yourself? And I said, I know what shelf I'm on. And she said, what is it? And I said, the shelf with the good books.
That's right.
And so that was where, I felt like that because you blended something didn't mean you didn't weaken anything. You just made it stronger.
Right.
But I think the indie market has opened up other authors nowadays. No one has to, there's no longer the box that has to be specifically fit into.
Right.
I think you still have to fit into a reader's idea of what you are, and you need to know how to market it.
Right.
So
I like how you said that knowing where your book fits, and I have said this a lot of times, that marketing is as much about repelling the wrong people as it is about attracting the right people. And because you don't want to just shotgun approach things, you just, like when you were, I'm sure when you were querying, you weren't querying houses that wouldn't take a book like you wrote. I mean, you were smart enough to know that. And so I think that's just really important. It's really good.
You need to know what you're writing. And you know, there, and a lot of people say, there's a bad idea of writing into a box, I hate to even use the word, but to a formula. And I don't consider anything writing to a formula when you're writing a book, but there are expectations, like for romance. There's definitely an expectation of what a romance should be. It should, don't kill the hero at the end, because you're going to have problems.
Because people will not be happy.
Exactly. You don't break them up and get a divorce at the end because it's not a romance.
Yes.
So there's expectations from everything, but at the same time, you need to know, and it's not that you can't cross a line. You stretch what the kind of book you want to write, and I think that's, in a way, I think that's why it took me so long to sell, is because I was writing a book that I enjoyed reading. I enjoyed romantic suspense, but I didn't like these serious books that, that was, no one ever smiled in. I didn't want to be depressed reading a book. I wanted to be happy.
They were too angsty for you.
Right. So I created my own way of going. And when I remember when I was first writing, this was after I sold my first book, and later when I started writing in 2006, it was difficult to, even as humor started coming out, I remember there was several humorous lines that I was trying to go traditionally, and they were, and I would send them my books, and they would come back, and I remember one editor actually telling me, "Oh my God, I love your humor, I love your writing style, but you've got a serious conflict in there." And I was like, "Yes, his wife died, and that's serious." I said, "Yes." And they would say, but our books won't have death in them because they're romantic comedies. And I'm thinking, but the funniest I ever laughed was at a funeral.
I know. Yep.
I mean, we have, humor isn't just because things, it's not, sometimes we write about it, and I think it's more so now, but at the time they really did not want to create real conflict, real emotion.
Yeah.
And now they've opened up to, even though it's funny, I mean, you can laugh and cry at the same time.
Right.
So for your books that blend like different genres, sort of, did you indie publish those, or did you find a traditional publisher that was interested in those?
I found at the time Dorchester was a smaller press in New York, and they were open to trying different things. And so they decided to give me a shot at this. And, the book started doing extremely well. And so it kind of opened up, and other people started doing. I mean, at the time when I first saw Janet Ivanovich had come out, and it was like, yeah, but Janet Ivanovich is not sexy, and it's not really all about you're more romance than you are about the mystery. And I'm like, yes, but just because they're happy, and but you have sex scenes in there, and I'm like, well, can it be both? Can it, I mean, can happy people, and so it was breaking a mold, and I think I was some of the first that actually started writing the romantic suspense with humor. And having it a little sexier than what you would call a cozy or something.
Right. Very good. Well, have you ever made a mistake that turned out to be a good thing?
Yes. A lot of them, actually. I mean, don't you love those stories about people who break their leg and meet the love of their life at the hospital or something? Yeah. But I think, it was funny because when I was writing the Divorce and Desperate series, which is the humorous romantic suspense, the first ones that was published, we were submitting them out there. I had an agent. We were submitting them out there. And someone said, if they were paranormal, I'd buy these in a snap, because that right then, the new funny paranormals were out. And so, you need to go back and write a paranormal. And I never will forget, I spent, a couple of months brainstorming this funny paranormal, and it was going to be about witches, because I knew nothing about bloodsuckers or fairies or werewolves. I knew nothing about those things. I didn't, that wasn't in my world. And so I thought, witches I can do. So I wrote it, and was the day I was going to send it in to my agent. She called me on the phone. She said, I just talked to the editor of Berkeley, and she can't wait to get your work. But she said, make sure it's not about witches.
Oh, no.
I mean, I spent months. And so I was just like, okay, no. She's like, well, can you change it? She wants it to be about fairies. And I'm thinking, I don't know nothing about freaking fairies, So I said, and so I was frustrated, and I was angry. So I sat down, I thought, they want a story about fairies, I'll give them a story about fairies. And I just started typing, and it was just like my humor voice really, because when I get mad, I get funnier.
Yeah.
And so, it started just like coming out, and I wrote this crazy story, and I sent it to critique partners, and they all said, oh, this is hilarious, but you're never going to sell that, Christy. You can't sell that. I mean, they're not going to, this is a little crazy. I mean, and I was like, Well, just because the fairy turned him into a poodle in heat because, she was upset at him and and she's like, oh yes, but it's so I wrote this book and everybody read it and said the same thing. Oh my God. Well, then my agent read it and said, oh my God, I love it, but it's out there. But she sent it out there and I wrote the proposal. So this is like 5 months now that I've spent on paranormal. Got shopped. It went to committee at every house, but no one would, everybody wanted it, but the end result was, it's just, it's too funny.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't think you could be too funny.
I don't either.
To think they would say no, but they did. So I was so upset when it was all over with and we got nothing but no's, because to me, it was 6 or 7 months that I spent on this journey trying to do something.
Mm-hmm.
And it didn't go anywhere. So I felt like it was a mistake.
Mm-hmm.
Fast forward, I've sold now my humorous romantic suspense books. An editor at St. Martin's who had read the freaking fairy book, and I actually did name it that, but it wasn't freaking. This editor picked up the phone because she remembered that story years later and actually called my agent and said, I want Christy to write a young adult book.
Oh my gosh.
And here I thought that was such a waste of time. That was my gateway into hitting the New York Times and being, successful in like 12 different countries.
That was your Shadow Falls. Was that the Shadow Falls books?
Yeah. So it was through something that until then I looked at as a waste of 7 months of my time.
Uh-huh.
And I will eventually sell that fairy book.
Yeah.
I promise you, it will go out. But it's, so I think a lot of times when you think you've done something that was a mistake, it ends up coming back. And that was where there is no waste of time when you're really writing and putting your heart and soul into something.
Yeah.
And so,
yeah.
Well, I got chills when you tell that story. Gosh, I don't think I'd heard that one. That was amazing.
Yeah.
Well, so what about the opposite? Have you ever had what you thought was like a super brilliant, amazing idea, and then it turned out later on to not be so great?
Oh, don't we all have those?
Well, we know we all have them. We're just asking, do you have any you'd like to share?
Oh, goodness. I mean, I can't remember something that I set out to do. I have written some things that got a first chapter on something and thought, oh, why did I think this would work? And then stopped. I mean, we all do that. In the very beginning, I had a lot of that. So, and then I've had a lot of people come to me with suggestions, like, oh, I know, why don't you do this? And you're just sitting there, your eyes are just rolling back in your head because you're thinking, how can you even see that?
Yeah.
But I think we all get ideas that seem to be really great for a few minutes. And then when we sit down, we realize, wait a minute, But my brain, and I think so many writers' brain, is that we're so creative that sometimes we think we've written ourselves in a corner, but we're just not looking the right way. And I think because if you get your head straight, because a lot of times, I remember one editor at Dorchester, my editor there used to say to me, oh, but you can't do this because of this. And I'm like, and it gives me this long list of things. Well, the cop, I mean, if he saw that truck and seen the bullet holes, and first of all, he wasn't from Texas because a lot of cars have bullet holes in Texas, So, but I mean, he was also, well, what are you going to do? You can't, and he was onto this that the cops couldn't see this van and da 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 da. And I said, oh, well, that's good. She'll just park it behind the 18-wheeler that's parked beside it. And so that's what we do so often is that we write ourselves in corners. It's not really a corner. Just don't have the police see the car,
Right.
See the front of it or something. So I think that a lot of times when you think you've written yourself in a corner, and there's something can't work out, you can find some great way of doing something that will make it work.
Right. And the problem is we just get so emotional about it, or I do. Let me speak for myself alone. I get so emotional about it that I'm like, oh, it can't be fixed. But if you just take a step back, of course it can be fixed. You're right. Anything can be fixed. So,
you keep your mouth shut when the editor is on the phone and giving you ideas or something. You just, the first thing you hear, you always say, yes, I'll think about that. Because you can't, and you're not the only one that gets emotional, by the way.
Yeah. Well, and I love it when people come up and say, I have this great idea for a book. You should write it, and then we'll split the money. That's my favorite thing that people do.
I always say, you should write that.
Yeah.
You just go right ahead and write that.
But I'm not really a writer. Well, that's the problem. Writers all have. This is my favorite line when I tell people that. I say, the problem is that I can't write your idea because I didn't create it. It wasn't born in my head.
Mm-hmm.
So I have story ideas myself.
That is the truth. So, tell us about you. So you've had success with traditional publishing, and most of your books primarily with trad publishers?
No, actually, I've done. I want to say now it's about 50-50.
Oh, great! Yeah.
I still do both. I enjoy doing both.
Mm-hmm.
I think like most writers, there are pros and cons about doing both.
Mm-hmm.
But it's it definitely. I think indie publishing has created so many options.
Yeah.
And I think in today's world, I think it's going to get harder and harder to sell traditional.
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, that isn't to say that traditional will ever go out of favor. I just think it's going to get harder.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's going to change.
Yeah, the whole thing has changed. So it's about 50-50.
Mm-hmm.
And I enjoy doing both. I think when I first started out, now, and I tell this, a lot of people come to me and say, okay, Christy, I am a new writer. I've just finished my first book. Should I try to go indie or should I try to sell this as a traditional published first? I get that question a lot. And I tell people this because I say, you know what? If indie publishing would have been available when I first started writing, I would have gone there so quick. The first time I got a rejection, I would have taken that little booger and I'd have put it up. Right. And today I would be so humiliated because it was so bad.
Yes. Yes.
And I think that at times that today's indie publishing is to write the book is the easy part. Mm-hmm. And making sure it's polished and perfect. I think that so many writers, when we first started out, and my age, when we first started out, we had to sort of walk through fire to get published. We had to write, I don't know how many books. We had to take, I don't know how many courses and years and train ourselves. And today you can write, people can sit down, write a book, and put it up. Mm-hmm. Without realizing the beginning mistakes that they're making. So I recommend anybody, I tell them there is not one way that is better than the other. You can make millions doing it one way and you can make millions doing it the other. You can make nothing one way and you can make
nothing the other.
Yeah. The trick is, I think, is to know that you've got a really good project. You've got something, and I don't think, and there are people who can, that there are people who do not need an editor. That do not need somebody to proof their work. They're perfect. I'm sure those people exist. I don't want to meet them, especially in a dark alley. But I'm not one of them.
Me either.
I need my work proofed. I need another set of eyes to look at something to say to me, you missed this. You should, have her, she didn't react to that. So, I mean, I need another pair of eyes, a couple of pair of eyes on my work. Yeah. And so I think, but I mean, there are people who can do it themselves without having that. But I think a mistake a new writer can make is putting something up before they really know it is as good as it needs to be.
Correct.
Yeah. Since you do both indie and traditional, what are your favorite parts of each one? What do you like best about traditional and what do you like best about indie?
Oh, I think I like both. The thing I like about writing the most is that writing it, getting that story down,
Yeah.
People who tell me, writers who say, oh, I love the rewriting. I love going through. No, I don't love that.
No.
To me, it's that getting that right piece of dialogue, laughing when you write something that first time, finishing a scene and knowing that was just perfect. I did not know it was going to turn out like that. I mean, that's the telling of a story is what I love. And so the other stuff, the getting it out, submitting it. I mean, it was easier in the days where I would write something and hand it over to somebody, and then they would take it out and somebody else would polish it and make it pretty, and somebody else would get ideas about the covers without me brainstorming for months, But at the same token, I enjoy some of that. So I will say I've been very fortunate for the cover fairies because we've all gotten covers at times. There's been a couple of times I got covers that I went, no, you can't put that on my book. But thankfully they have always listened to me when I've had an input. So I mean,
that's great.
Covers that I didn't love, but none that I hated. That always changed the ones. So I think that I love the creative process of writing more than anything, whether it's indie or the other. To me, it's the same. I think that you have to go in it with that thought process if you're doing an indie or whatever, because I think it varies. Like, it behooves you to write a shorter book for indie because they do want those books out,
faster
together and faster. So it kind of behooves you to write a shorter book. But at the same time, I think I just want to write a good book. I just want to write a book that readers can't put down. I want to write a book that somebody says, oh my God, when she did that, I laughed till I peed my pants. Or you had me laughing, and then 2 pages later you had me crying, and I want to make readers feel something.
So whether it's indie or traditional, that's the goal. Yeah,
I want to write that. I want to write a good book,
right?
And that's my goal.
Well, I want to just tell our listeners that I've known Christy for, I don't know, Christy, probably 7 years or something like that. Because we were in the same Romance Writers of America group, and anytime my writing gets hard or things get hard around my writing, I do always think of Christy, because Christy, as she said, is dyslexic, and she does a talk that's amazing, and she has tons, and I'm not exaggerating, of rejection letters. And she kept writing and she kept doing things. And so Christy knows about writing when things are hard. And so I just really wanted you to take a minute, if you don't mind, and just kind of, because this is a hard time for our listeners, and writers in general. Well, for the world, frankly. And if you have any advice about writing when things are hard and you're distracted, or your personal life is kind of not going the way you want it to go or something.
Right. Well, I mean, life is like most everyone. We've been thrown some curves. Right now, there's a lot of curves being thrown at us, but personal curves. I think that I found a lot of the times writing was my saving grace because my writing became my escape. Now, I'm not going to tell you that it hasn't been harder. These last few months have been difficult with the coronavirus or whatever, but I've actually ridden through. My husband had a transplant. He was very sick for a long time. Then he got the transplant and was very sick for a long time after he got the transplant.
Right.
So, and I think at that time the writing became my escape. I was able to shut off the worry, the concern, the fret, the health issues, and lose myself in a story and write. Now, I found, though, during my father passed away recently, actually, at the beginning of the coronavirus. And between that and I lost 2 writing friends. And when that happened, it became difficult. It became that writing suddenly was, I'd sit down to do it, and it would be like, I would sit there every day for hours and stare at that computer and maybe get a paragraph done. But the thing that I recommend to everyone who is to remember that you're showing up and you're sitting there. And maybe I would start writing something, and later on I might have to go back and revise it. I'm a firm believer that writing is a career and it is my job. I refuse to look at writing as this creative magic poof of ball that just happens. That if there's this muse sitting on my shoulder, or because if there was a muse, I'd have a cage and I'd have him locked in it because I wouldn't let him leave, because if he left, then I would lose it. I've always said that people ask me, well, writer's block, and I always tell people that, my father was a plumber, and every day he got up and he would get up and go to work. And as a child, I'd be up, I could hear them moving around the house, and I said, not once in all my years do I ever recall hearing my father say, I cannot plumb today because I have plumber's block. I mean, he got up and he went to work.
Yep.
And there was no such thing as plumber's block. And I'm sure my father, there are days that he hated his job. There was days that felt like, crap. And I feel like, he probably was dealing with a lot of crap literally because he's a plumber. And there are days I feel like I write crap. But I get up and I go to work. And that is something, even during the hardest times, I still came in here and sat in front of my computer. Even if I got a paragraph done that day, I still came in and I sat down, because this is my career. It is not something that I need a magic ball to get me going.
Right.
And, I love it. I think there's days people can get burnout. We get burnout. People suddenly decide, I do not want to be a teacher anymore. I do not want to be a brain surgeon anymore. But if you are writing because you love it, and that's what I do. That was what I just really in the last, I want to say, month have I really begun to feel that I'm getting my mojo back from after the coronavirus and everything. And part of the ways I've done it is reconnecting what I love about writing. And, find that time to read. If you're a writer, you're having difficulty, go find one of your favorite books and read it.
That's great advice. Yeah.
And remember what it was like to read it and to think, wow, find the things you loved about writing. I mean, do the crazy, 10 list things that could happen in this chapter. I mean, find things that work for you to get you back excited about the story.
That's great. Yeah, that's
such
great
good
advice.
advice.
Yeah.
Yep.
Thank you.
So, what's the best thing you've done to set yourself up for success in your author career? If you could narrow it down to one thing.
One thing.
You've given us a lot of good advice, and we appreciate it all. But if you have one thing.
One thing I think is to really find a way to get in your character's skin. I think that a lot of writers have a tendency, and I get asked a lot of questions like, how can you write young adult characters, and their issues, and then you turn around and is it a completely different voice to write adults? And to me, I think the best day I ever had, the best Facebook message I ever got was someone who posted on my Facebook that said, "Today is the best day ever. I just found out that my two favorite authors are the same person."
Oh,
because they didn't know that C.C. Hunter and Christy Craig were the same
people. Yeah.
And they were lovers of both and they were trying to figure out which one do I love the best. I don't know. And so the thing is that if you can get into your character's skin, it doesn't matter the voice. I mean, what I tell people, I said, I'm in a 16-year-old girl writing this story. They're not going to care if the electric bill gets paid.
Right.
They're not going to care that they need to, get, enough money to put in savings or whatever. What they care about. So if you get into your character's skin, if you really get to know this character, what's important to them, what matters to them, what are they most afraid of, what do they care about, what makes them laugh, what makes them cry, what's their biggest regret in life. If you can find out who this person is, then you can write a story from them, and it doesn't matter about the voice because the character comes out. And so I think getting the one piece of advice that is making sure you know this character inside and out, that you know everything about them, that when you're in there writing their story is you're going through this person you've created and not trying to worry about, is this too adult or this too, is this too young adult or whatever. I mean, I write a story. I never stop and think, oh, a young adult wouldn't say this, because in my head, I am that young adult. And they're speaking through me, and so it works.
Yeah.
So I think getting into your character's skin is making sure you know them.
That is great. Well, this has been awesome, Christy. Just such a great interview and such nuggets of, just golden nuggets of information in here. Tell our listeners where they can find you online, and do that.
I am on Facebook. You can find me, Christy Craig, on Facebook. I'm on CC Hunter. You can find me. My website is www.christy-craig.com, cchunterbooks.com. You can, Google me. You'll find plenty more about me than you care to know about me, believe it or not. Occasionally, I don't know about you guys, but I occasionally Google myself just to see.
Just to see
what all is out there. And amazingly, you can find things about yourself you didn't know because there's other CC Hunters and Christy Craigs out there. But,
exactly.
Yes, go find me online. I'm there. I'm out there. Would love to hear from you. The books, I've got one coming out, Don't Look Back, is the third book in the Texas Justice series, and it's coming out in December. And I've got two young adults that I've started that I probably am going to go indie on those. I'm finishing off, and we're shopping around right now, Secrets of Sweet Mesquite, which is the humorous romantic suspense with a cowboy theme. So.
Nice. That is
Gotta love a cowboy.
Oh, don't you love a cowboy?
Well, that's great.
We'll put all your links in our show notes, and our listeners can find you there. So thank you so much. We appreciate you being here.
Wonderful day. And good luck to everyone out there. And
yes,
stay safe away from this virus right now.
That's right.
All right.
All right.
You can find everything at wishidknownforwriters.com. Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thanks for listening to the Wish I'd Known Then podcast. We hope this episode inspired you, empowered you, and made you laugh a little bit too. If you loved it, tell your friends about it. And if you feel so inclined, leave us a review. We look forward to being with you again next week.